I'm Deborah Cohen. I'm a historian at the university and the director of the Roberta Buffett Institute for Global Affairs. And it's really a pleasure to welcome you here today. It's lovely to have such a great turnout for what is certain to be a really marvelous event. So it's especially wonderful to have Lina Sergie Attar here with us today to talk about rebuilding work and humanitarian work in Syria. Sergie Attar is a Syrian-American architect and writer from Aleppo. She's published widely about Syria, including in the New York Times and Foreign Policy magazine, as well as many, many other places. And she's appeared on the BBC, NPR, and NBC, among others, to talk about the Syrian civil war. She is a non-resident fellow at New America. She is also the visionary founder and CEO of the Karam Foundation, an NGO that every year helps tens of thousands of Syrians in need through innovative education projects for refugee youth and also funds sustainable development projects that are initiated by Syrians for Syrians. And her humanitarian work and her vision for education will be part of what we're going to hear about today. And you will see also cards on all the tables and in the back as well to tell you more about Karam Foundation. Joining her in conversation is Wendy Perlman, who is Jane Long Professor of Arts and Sciences, as well as Professor of Political Science, she's a renowned scholar of the Middle East with thematic interests in migration, occupation, and everyday life, especially the everyday struggle for freedom. She's written 6 books, 3 of which are about Syria, and her most recent is The Home I Worked to Make, Voices from the New Syrian Diaspora, which LiveRight published in 2024. Again, thank you both for being with us, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for being here, and thank you especially, Lina. So Lina, we met in 2012. But the truth is that I'd met you much earlier without knowing it, because at the time I was reading these tremendously beautiful essays about the human spirit of the Syrian revolution, written by someone named Amal Hanano, which turned out to be the pseudonym that you were using at the time to protect your family still in Syria. So I was awed to learn that this incredibly talented writer was also, as Deborah just said, a visionary institution builder addressing Syria's enormous humanitarian crisis, but not through the conventional lens of providing relief. Rather, you and the Karam Foundation were spearheading a range of creative initiatives to give displaced youth the access that they need and deserve to dream, develop their skills, and become leaders. Since that first meeting in Chicago, I'm lucky to have had the chance to join your team of mentors to teach at a school near the Turkish-Syrian border in 2015, to twice get to teach at the incredible Karam House, we say here, that you later established there. And about 5 months ago, to do what neither of us ever imagined possible, which was meet in Syria, in Aleppo, and then travel together to Idlib. And here we are now at Northwestern, to explore how Karam is building on more than 15 years of hard-earned experience to help Syrians move from crisis response to lasting recovery. So to start, can you tell us a little bit more about Karam, the work it has been doing since the Syrian uprising began in 2011, as well as the thinking that led you to that particular approach?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Northwestern University and the Buffett Institute and to Deborah for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to be speaking to you all about Syria. I've been speaking about Syria, as Deborah said, for many years, and it's been very special in the past year to be able to come and give you a story of hope, when lots of times when I was coming, we were in a story of extreme disaster with no end in sight. So it's a new age, a new era for Syria, and it's an exciting one, but with a lot of challenges. And Wendy, you've just been so instrumental in telling the Syrian story and writing your books that highlight Syrian voices first. And becoming an expert at that. So any students out here, please take Wendy's classes. And we've been in contact all of these years and growing with this crisis. So going back to the origin of Karam, I started it on my kitchen table in 2007, Before the Syrian revolution had even began, Karam means generosity in Arabic. And it really came from this point of view of thinking about generosity and giving in new ways, and thinking about how do we have the power to create change through generosity and through giving, because I wasn't that happy looking around and seeing, you have these extremely large agencies where people don't really know where their money is going. And then you have very local initiatives where people are giving very, direct to communities that they're from. And I thought that there could be a wider lens. And that's where it grew from. But in 2011, our purpose completely shifted when the Syrian revolution began. And I went from somebody who was, holding events and raising some money for causes I believed were really good, to people calling me on the phone saying, we need a field hospital established in Homs today, which is in central Syria, an area that had a city that had a lot of protests, and the regime was shooting at protesters. And if you had a bullet shot, then you couldn't go to any hospital because they'll know that means you were protesting and you would be taken away. So we were in the position, like many Syrians in the diaspora, to try to help in any way that we could. And that's where really Karam began, of responding, listening to what people needed, responding, figuring out how to do it, and then moving forward from there. And within a year, we were talking, is it my turn? And so we went from doing this kind of emergency work to focusing on education and focusing on refugees, because the refugee crisis, had started within a year of the revolution beginning, and we grew with the crisis.
And what were the sorts of things you did as you guys continue to grow?
We did so many things, emergency relief, building bakeries, supporting local organizations that had their own projects on the ground, underground schools in Aleppo when the people couldn't go to school anymore because they were under the bombs and the barrel bombs. We did support in the besieged areas outside of Damascus, where people were living under hunger for many years, and then under chemical weapon attacks. And then in the diaspora areas, in Turkey, specifically working with Syrian refugees in camps, Syrian refugees in urban areas, and supporting families, supporting kids getting them out of child labor, stopping child marriages, and then doing a lot of innovation work, because our work was always, and until now when we talk about the work in Syria, it was always about, you have an emergency now, but there's what can we do to invest in tomorrow? And so that was always really important to Karam, because I saw a lot of people trying, for instance, to just deliver food, which is really important. But if you just deliver food today in a camp, it doesn't help people in the next years. So that's why we decided to focus on education, innovation, actually how do we get young people that's my passion, is how do we get young people to be able to reach their full potential and actually be able to rely on themselves in 5 to 10 years, which is something I didn't see a lot of around us. I saw a lot of emergency aid and not thinking about the future.
Yeah. And so how did you get to Karam House, and what was the vision there and the project of 10,000 leaders?
So Karam House, what came out of years of going to the Syrian border in southern Turkey when it became too dangerous for us to enter Syria, which was very early in 2013. We could no longer cross the border into Syria. It was too dangerous. And so we established work in a town called Reyhanli, which is right on the Syrian border with Turkey. It's a couple of miles away. You can actually see the border from different areas in Reyhanli. Before the war, it was a forgotten town, really. Nobody really knew about it. It had around 50,000 Turkish people who lived there. And at the peak of the crisis, it ended up having over 400,000 Syrians living there. And so we started going there and established connections with the local schools. And we realized that we wanted to create a program that kids could have all year round, instead of us just going for a week or two at a time to focus on that. And we called it Karam House. And it's a really, it's a building that has inside of it everything created for teenagers. And we have an innovation program, which is called Karam Studios. They have a maker space, a library, a kitchen, and really, I'm really interested in this idea of flipping the switch bridge between what we usually see for refugees, what we usually see for vulnerable communities. So this building has 2 small rooms for our entire staff, and the whole building is for the kids. And they enter in that with a lot of pride that they could just come here, go and build their projects, use the laser cutters, 3D printers, laptops, internet, read a book, play chess, and go into the kitchen and get a snack. Lots of things that they couldn't actually do in their own homes. And so parents and kids would often call Karam House their home. We established a second Karam House in Istanbul over the years, and we actually completed our operations there about 6 months ago and established 2 separate smaller maker spaces in a camp that's outside of Antakya or Hatay, which is about 45 minutes north of Reyhanli, because also this area was an area that was severely impacted by the 2023 earthquake. So we've actually created a way of doing this innovation program that we've developed with a partner called Nouveau Studios in Cambridge, Massachusetts, also a Syrian friend of mine who established this program, also an architect. So there's a through line here of design and creativity and innovation that comes from my background and from people that we've attracted to be part of the program, in that we want to create a space for kids to be able to imagine new futures for themselves, really any future that they think that they want to have. We tell them that anything is possible. We're giving you the tools and the opportunities, but you have to actually build it. And that's where the idea of 10,000 leaders came in 2018. I was thinking of a way of how do I bridge all of the programs that we do, which is family support, innovation, education, as well as scholarships for students going to university. And I realized we're building a pathway to leadership. And the 10,000 leaders idea came from the fact that I grew up in Syria, and in Syria, it was the country of one leader, one family, the Assad regime. We weren't even allowed to talk about the leadership in terms of your own potential as a citizen. And the word leader, qa'id, in Arabic actually started having a really negative connotation. It kind of meant dictator. And I wanted to reclaim this idea of leadership for all Syrians, all Syrian youth, that you can become a leader wherever you are, even if you are a refugee. And that's what we were teaching the students, that, you know, leadership is living in Turkey as a refugee and still having the community responsibilities of making the place better, and kind of having them have this idea that being a refugee is just a circumstance and shouldn't define who you are.
Wow. And having seen Karam House a few times, I can say it's a really special place. And a special place that you built for those who were forcibly displaced, so they could continue to build their lives and their futures, all outside Syria. And maybe as the time went on, thinking that going back into Syria wouldn't be possible. And then it was. To everyone's surprise, the Assad regime collapsed. So could you tell us a bit more about what that was like for you personally, both the collapse of the regime, Syria's liberation, and your own return home?
So this is, I mean, it's still very surreal and emotional to talk about December 8, 2024, the day that the Assad regime collapsed. It started about 11 days earlier during Thanksgiving night. We were at home in Lake Forest, and we were hearing rumblings of another, you know, the rebels are coming and they're entering into Aleppo, and we didn't know what that meant. And we were actually very scared, because usually what happens if the people that are anti-regime start moving around, it'll be followed by Russian airstrikes. And half of Aleppo has been destroyed by the war, the eastern side, which we'll see some slides. But the western side, which my family lives in, was not really affected by the airstrikes, the areas that were under regime control. So we were thinking like the Russians are going to come in and destroy all of it. And within a couple of days, there were some airstrikes, but it was limited, and then it stopped. And basically, HTS, which is the forces that were occupying Idlib province in northern Syria, basically moved from Aleppo all the way down to Damascus, ending the 54-year regime that nobody thought would ever topple. And I never thought in my life I would see a Syria without Assad, and actually no Syrian that I knew ever thought that as well.
And on December 8th, I actually was in Vancouver with my younger daughter, Rayanne, attending Taylor Swift's last concert. So it was very surreal to be doing that while watching the news during the concert of everything that's happening in Syria and really having this sense of liberation. And I just wanted, and 1 month later, I went to Syria with my daughter, Alia, and my brother, and we were there January 8th. So I wanted to show some slides. And so it was basically because a lot of Syrians I know have made this trip, and you've actually made this trip to Syria, and everybody kind of goes through a roller coaster of emotions, which is, you know, entering in a new country. This is entering in from the Lebanese border. I went before the airports had actually opened, and you begin to see the revolution flag really everywhere, and used everywhere. And then you see these slogans that you would have never imagined before liberation. It says, the great Syria and not Assad Syria, because for all of the years we lived under the regime, it was literally called Assad Syria and nobody else's. And this is a statue. This is a statue in Aleppo that actually, this was called Duwar al-Basil, which was Basil al-Assad, Hafiz's son, Bashar's brother, who died in a car accident in the late 90s. This used to have him on top of it. So when they toppled a lot of the statues, they actually just took him off and left the horse to be free, and changed the name of this to the Freedom Circle. So this is a really important site in Aleppo. And then filled with signs about the revolution, that the revolution is for all of Syria, and this sign that I really love, which says all of the countries that helped in killing Syrians should apologize and give reparations. So this was coming. You feel like a tourist in your own home because we never thought we would see Syria again. You know, when I was going to Rayhanle, which is right on the border, I would go look at the border, look at the IDP camps across the border, and I say, that's it. This is the closest I'll ever be to my country. And then in the middle, you're in the middle of Damascus, and it feels like it's a miracle to see all of the, you know, the regular sites and people. This is the Umayyad Mosque. That spans back hundreds of years, actually thousands of years, because it used to be a Byzantine church. And so Syria is very, very old. I'm trying to click through, but it's going. This is Sahat al-Marjeh in Syria, and this is very significant because after the fall of the regime, they opened up all of the prisons, but there were still tens of thousands of people that were disappeared by the regime, and until now, people do not know where their loved ones are. So right after the liberation, people were putting up photos of their loved ones to see if anybody had saw them out of the prisoners who left. This is looking at all of Damascus from Mount Qasyun. This is Hummus, the famous clock in central Syria. And this is Aleppo. This is the citadel of Aleppo and the small streets. And you definitely feel like time has stopped here. And you see a lot of happy faces of people that we saw in the different shops. And this is when this is Western Aleppo, and this is when I was going for the first time in the taxi with my brother to see our home that I never thought that I would see.
Getting closer to home. It feels like a dream.
So this is going into this area called the Shambat.
And I don't think that it's real.
And truly it felt like a miracle because I never thought I would see these streets again. And this is my daughter and I in front of our home. And my parents actually had moved to Lake Forest because of the war. And since then, we fixed up our house and they did go back home. This was inside my parents' home. We're going through all of the items. This is my grandmother's home. She came with my parents in 2013 and actually died in Michigan a year later. And so this is her home on the 3rd floor. And this is actually the entrance to the Bab Qan-Nasrin, which is one of the 7 gates of Aleppo. And that's where my great-great-grandparents are from. So when you meet somebody who's Syrian, they're really talking about, you know, thousands or hundreds of years of history that they can trace out. And here are some images of just, you know, what the destruction of the country. So you go through this the disbelief of Syria even being, of going back, and then you actually go through a lot of sorrow, a lot of pain, and anger about the destruction. Do you want me to move forward? Yeah. I just wanted to show here the old souks of Aleppo. And I want to talk about, because this one will be important when we talk about reconstruction. So there were areas, and then you can also see how you can have this sense of freedom. And freedom is all over the walls in Syria. And this is us leaving. And then basically this is one of Feiruz's, the very famous singer, basically saying that there's still hope.
Amazing. I mean, it's incredible context then to think about Karam and the innovative work it's doing. So what do you see as the biggest challenges facing Syria today in the realm of reconstruction in general and in education in particular?
So basically, I mean, if you can see from the images of the destruction, the infrastructure, like Syria, like a lot of Syrians will say we're below zero. We're starting from below zero. And so you will see that when you're talking specifically about education, over 7,000 schools in Syria have been partially or completely destroyed. When we're talking about when Karam is going into Syria, we're talking about schools, kids don't have windows, doors, heat, electricity, even desks. So sometimes even if you find a building that has been kind of fixed up, the kids are sitting on the floor. They don't have books. The teaching field has been decimated by the war. Teachers have disappeared. People have become refugees. And so everything needs a full restart. And it's the same if you talk about healthcare, the same if you talk about housing and all of the infrastructure in Syria.
And so for education, what is the landscape of schooling and the challenges faced?
The most important thing is actually getting people back to school. So a lot of people are working on school renovation projects. Karam we've worked on 17 schools so far to get them back started up. And there's also teacher trainings that are happening. And then you have this, we are also worried about, there's 2 million Syrian students that actually don't have access to school at all. So the president is actually thinking about an online kind of courses that kids can take so that they could be able to catch up. And then we're talking about refugee returns. So when you're talking about kids coming back from neighboring countries, especially something like Turkey, where there's on top of all of that a language barrier, then you're talking about how do you actually catch students back up to the grades that they're in the Syrian schools studying in Arabic. And then also the kids that never left also have challenges. So when you're talking about education and kids, this is something that we've been going through for the past 14 years of, at the beginning with the revolution, we were focused on teaching all the kids Turkish. And now we actually have in Reyhanli Arabic classes to help people who are thinking about returning to get their kids back prepped up. And so it's constant change on all of these kids, which is really, really hard.
Maybe to help bring it home for us, can you help us imagine like the life of one of these kids that you guys work with? I mean, who might be like 18 years old, one of the age of our first year students or incoming students here at Northwestern. Like, what are the kinds of things that they faced in their life in terms of their past experiences? What are the challenges they're facing now? Who is someone like this so we can know what it even means to meet their needs?
Yeah, if you're an 18-year-old Syrian refugee, like all of the kids that I work with, you've basically lived through multiple displacements. People don't get displaced only once. You probably moved multiple times before you even left the country. You probably lived in a camp and then moved out of the camp. And then you're living in places, whether that's Lebanon, Turkey, or Jordan. And then if you're in places like Europe, you're definitely not wanted. So you're living your life, going to a school where there's a few Syrians and a lot of other people that don't want you to be there. You're struggling with learning the language. And then on top of it, you go through a pandemic where your learning goes remote and your family doesn't even know the language to even help you study in that time frame. And then if you're with some of the Karam kids that are in southern Turkey, you have an earthquake, which displaces you again. And the earthquake created a lot of fear and actual reliving of trauma for millions of Syrians who saw themselves seeing something even worse than the war, they would say. We lost over 10 of our students with their families in the earthquake. And so that was also an additional piece. So it's very hard to be a young Syrian person who's gone through all of that and is continuously asked to keep moving forward. But then also what we've done at Karam is throughout the years, this investment of getting people to have a place to belong, a place that's very high in dignity, a place where they have access to tools that are, cutting edge and world class. I like using those words with the students to basically say, you're worth it, you mean something, and you can reach wherever you want to. So on the flip side of that, we've seen students who have completed university, who've gone on to get really good jobs, not because they're refugees, but because they knew how to do things that others didn't know how to do, which makes me very proud. And we have one girl, Rima, who back in 2016, when I met her as a young teenager at Karam House, said she wants to be an artificial intelligence engineer, back when nobody was really talking about AI, and now she is studying that in Turkey. One of our first students that were part of our families program, which we were getting kids out of child labor, Muhammad, I met him in 2014 or 15 at a gas station, and we got his family into the program, which, we take kids out of child labor and we actually give the family financial assistance on condition that they send their kids to school. Well, Muhammad became a mechanical engineer 2 years ago. And so lots of lives can be changed with this kind of work.
Wow. So now thinking about going inside Syria, what is Karam doing or beginning to do or envisioning doing, moving its programming inside Syria?
Absolutely. So I have a video.
For more than a decade, we've stood with Syrian families as they've started over by providing the resources to build something meaningful after all that was left behind. We've supported more than 100,000 displaced Syrians with education, aid, and the tools to imagine something better. Karam is Syrian-led. More than half of our team has lived through what we're working to change, so we understand what the community needs because we are the community. We've created spaces where healing, learning, and possibility live side by side. From the moment you walk in, Karam House is designed to feel like home. It's where Syrian youth come to ask big questions, pitch wild ideas, solve real problems, and finally see themselves as the leaders of the future. You can feel the shift happen, a sense of, I belong here. And that energy doesn't stay in the building. It moves outward to families, classrooms, and entire communities. It's leadership in the making. And when the community can't come to us, we bring the spark to them, into refugee camps, villages, and places that rarely get this kind of investment. We've led over 4,000 innovative studios, supported hundreds of families with monthly aid, and helped thousands of young people stay in school and pursue higher education. We're seeing those futures unfold in universities, startups, hospitals, and some of the biggest global corporations. And now we've brought this same spirit into Syria as Beit Karam. Beit Karam is building on the foundation of everything we've learned as an organization since 2011. To create lasting impact, we need to invest in the community and the youth. We're restoring schools that have been damaged and neglected in the war, reopening doors, repairing classrooms, installing solar power, and bringing learning back to neighborhoods across the country that had nearly given up hope. We're welcoming returning families home with dignity, supporting them with the essentials they need to restart their lives, stable housing, school enrollment for their children, and repairing the powerful feeling of belonging. And through Karam Caravan, we're delivering hands-on innovation studios directly to rural, war-torn, and vulnerable areas, bringing creativity, engineering, and imagination to school classrooms across Aleppo, Idlib, and the countryside. We are celebrating the power of rebuilding, the strength of Syrian mothers who carry generations forward, the resilient communities who refuse to be forgotten. The classrooms are lit again. Karam Caravan is arriving to schools with children who never stopped wanting to learn. And families are beginning their lives over, not in exile, but at home. This is how the future gets built. Together. This is Karam.
So basically that was an overview of everything that we do, and going straight into Syria, some of the things I already talked about, what are the challenges and what's missing. the schools and the kids not being able to access school. And we're focusing on Aleppo, which is in the north, because it's very close to the border, very close to, I am also from Aleppo, and a lot of our team is, and it's close to Rayhanli, which our team is now able to come because it's about an hour drive. But we've also supported local communities in rebuilding schools outside Damascus. So you can see here, like Rayhanli is that blue dot. We're working in Aleppo and the Aleppo countryside, and Janderis, which is in northern Aleppo and outside of Damascus with a local partner. So the big idea was, how do we take Karam House into Syria? And we had the idea of building Karam House again, Karam House Aleppo. It would be very easy for us to do. But I knew that if I did that, we're going to be able to support a couple hundred kids maybe in the neighborhood of, we'll get to full capacity very quickly. And what happened in Syria with the new government is they're very cooperative with organizations because they need the help, all the help they can get. And so we came up with the idea of Karam Caravan, which is basically a maker space on wheels, which we're very, very excited about. And Wendy actually was with us when we bought the truck in Idlib. We took her with us to Idlib and she saw it in the making. And so this truck has inside of it all of the tools that we need, all of the high-tech tools. And we made partnerships with 4 different schools right now in Aleppo and the countryside and eastern Aleppo. So we're working in the most vulnerable areas where we go to the school and our mentors who are training new Syrian mentors, and they go into the high schools and deliver our program. So the workshops are design thinking and digital fabrication, coding, robotics, civic and community leadership. We're working with 4 schools. We can reach 4,000 students annually. Already we began in the beginning of November, and we've reached over 700 students so far. And here you can see some images of what's going on inside. It's really, really cool. I went with the caravan the first day it went out. Excuse me. And the digital literacy for these kids, like we talked about everything they've been through, it's about 1 in every 14 students have even seen a laptop before. So we're starting with, this is a computer, but we also had, when I talk about the emergency situation and what happens next, we had the computers, which they've never seen before, but we also had VR headsets. And so they were doing like really, really cool things at the same time of doing the basic things. And the school rebuilding project is really important. We've been working on 17 schools. This includes refurbishing whole schools and also bringing solar power to the schools, because Syrian schools have been disconnected from electricity for 14 years. A lot of people would even say, why do schools even need electricity? Because they come during the day and they have enough light, which is crazy. Because when we put a couple solar panels on one school outside Damascus, I got a photograph from a teacher saying that she used a projector for the first time. And I just think about, like, what is a projector? It's nothing. And that for them is such huge technology to be able to use. So it's really meaningful to be able to turn on the heat. The kids, when I would meet them, they would say the most important thing is please fix our windows because in the winter we're so cold. And so the heat, the electricity, really the basics, the bathrooms, and then actually how do we bring in the technology and the investment. And we're also supporting Syrian refugee families to return. And Wendy also visited one of the families. So that was another thing with when we talk about refugee return. And that's something that everybody should really pay attention to when you talk about Syria, is that yes, there's a possibility, and it's incredible. It's a miracle in the story of displacement and refugees that we could have a story of millions of people potentially returning home. But the return is very, very hard. And we did a survey with all the families that we support, and they came back to us saying, we want to go back, but we can't afford to. So we actually created a return grant and funded so far 30 families to return. And we think that number is going to go up higher this summer. But you want to be able to help refugees return with dignity, with enough money to start rebuilding their homes and enough money to start out, which is the large agencies are not doing that at all. So those are the things we're doing now. And that's what we want to focus on as we develop more.
So what have been the main, I guess, either challenges or lessons or both, as you guys transition from being an organization based primarily outside Syria to moving inside Syria?
I mean, the challenges there are many, many challenges of just, now that we actually have an opportunity to, we have the potential to be in many, many more schools. So scaling up as an organization is a challenge, and we want to do it very thoughtfully. A lot of people want to have access to these programs, but we can't be everywhere at once. So figuring out how to grow. Another challenge is actually how do we support the most vulnerable, because a lot of people want to have access to these programs, but we're talking about I want to be in places that are in the rural areas where people were really left behind, or the areas that were most affected by the war. So that's also hard because it's not the easiest place to work in. Funding is definitely going to be a challenge because of everything that we're seeing with US aid. We don't receive government grants, but everybody gets affected by the current administration's view towards international aid, because now the kind of foundations and the organizations that would fund Karam are getting requests from large agencies that should be funded by governments. And so this affects everybody around the world. And I think one of the challenges not Karam has, but Syria has in general, is you don't see Syria in the news anymore at all. Right now, there are so many crises in the world. And this is what we saw after the earthquake too, and it happens all across the world, is that people only really recognize the emergency, but recovery from a war and from this kind of devastation will take a long time. And if it's forgotten, then we might not see the outcomes that we would like to see with Syria, which is to have this freedom and dignity and really being able to have people live to their full potential.
And are there lessons that you've already learned? I know it's early still.
Yeah, many lessons. I mean, one of the most important things that we learned is that when you go, we were very intentional about what we took inside Syria, even though we were right across the border. Lessons learned from what we've done in Turkey, and as a refugee organization, we knew we couldn't just transfer our programs in and just blindly. So we know that this first year and 2 years is going to be listening, learning what the challenges are, and how do we actually co-develop solutions with the community. And that's what we've been always doing with Karam. So that's a really important thing to do, to know that we are going to continue focusing on education. But right now, for instance, we're focusing also on how do we build livelihood. And so we're starting to do a pilot program on focusing on 18 to 29-year-olds and how do we actually help people get jobs, because the economic stability is really, really important. This is something that we didn't do before, and we're testing the waters of seeing like where this is. Another thing that we want to do is make sure that we're collaborating with on-the-ground people and on-the-ground communities, because there are many, many organizations working. So how do we collaborate? And actually, how do we work with the government? We never thought we would be working with the Syrian government, and we're learning how to do that, and how to work with the Ministry of Education, and how to develop these kinds of relationships that could end up being very like have a lot of potential in the future.
So we chose to title today's event Rebuilding Home and Homeland, and you've thought a lot about the questions of home and belonging in the Syrian context. What do these concepts mean to you today, and what are you discovering that they mean for Syrian youth and families with whom you work?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about belonging for so long, and I know you've thought about this question a lot. And it's actually still really, really important as ever. I spent so much time talking to people, and I even have a podcast called Belongings that we're going to be bringing back. And this idea, when you're displaced and you're in exile and you think that you're never going to be able to go back home, everybody that I would speak to would talk about how home is not the land, home is not the place, home is the community, home is where you feel safe. Kids gave me so many different definitions of what home is, but then when you actually go back, home is so much of the place. And I can say that personally, when I went back, I've spent so much time convincing myself that it didn't matter anymore, but it matters so much to go back to the place where you're from. And it matters even more that it was taken from you for almost no reason. So there's a lot of reflection on belonging. What does return mean? but also what does it even mean to be Syrian? And that's a really important question that, I've been thinking about in the context of kids that had never seen Syria. How do I teach kids that have never seen Syria what Syria is and what it is beyond the war, which is a very small portion of Syria's history? And now going back also, what does it mean to be Syrian? What does it mean to live together? What does it mean to build peace? What does it mean to forgive? I mean, this was the regime's war on its own people, but a lot of Syrians committed a lot of crimes towards Syrians, and these people are living together, and these people are neighbors. I think about the person who tortured and the person who was tortured living in the same space. These are really tough questions that Syria as a nation, because we're rebuilding a new nation right now, they have to grapple with. And I think that this is a question even in America that we have to grapple with. What does it mean to be American now? I know that a lot of people and a lot of young people have that on their minds as well. I mean, we saw that yesterday in the Super Bowl, right? And so these questions are not things that you just answer and it's like static. It's something that's always growing and evolving. And what we all collectively want to do wherever we are is to be growing that question and answering it in ways that builds instead of creates division and violence. So, I mean, I think that this is the most important part of whatever Karam does is kind of building that part of what does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to be Syrian? How do we live together? And we're building actually these pieces into the studios because so a lot of our design studios are having this piece building part of it, which is, what kind of projects are they doing? It's going to be civic projects. It's going to be solving problems. It's working together. And we hope that this is going to instill a sense of that pride and Syrianness in them, that they want to move forward and build the country that they live in.
So can I come do my citizen work?
Absolutely. And yeah, Wendy actually developed, you should talk about the participatory citizenship workshop that you developed specifically for this moment.
Yeah. So I guess on that's a transition to our final question, which is what can all of us do to help?
There's lots of things you can do to support Karam. You can follow us on social media. Please sign up for our newsletter. We send about 2 newsletters a month, which are very informative. Tell your friends about Karam. We have volunteer opportunities. We actually have a previous intern, I think Amani left. So we have interns who are part of this community. So we have volunteering opportunities, obviously donating. You can fundraise for Karam. There's lots of different things that you can do. But I really encourage you all to, check us out and share the word about the work because the need is very high.
Fabulous. I think we can open it up to questions. Yeah, thank you, Lina.
Yeah, any questions?
Incredibly informative. I guess I'm kind of curious about how and if Caesar Act, like the removal of the American sanctions against Syria, has had any kind of effect on your operational capacity, and if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the sanctions question is very, it's not as clear as people think. The sanctions were removed, but they're still in the process of actually making sure this actually happens on the ground. So I don't think it's 100% yet, but it does have a huge effect. So for instance, at the beginning of the, when the liberation happened, all of the technology and the pieces that we do at Karam technically were not legal to do. So we actually were working on Karam Foundation specifically. We're a 501c3, so we were grandfathered into this thing called the OFAC license, which means that we were always allowed to function legally in Syria and distribute funds and distribute humanitarian aid. But there was a piece of it which excludes technology. And so we were actually, I'm so grateful that I didn't have to continue doing that, but I was meeting sanctions lawyers and everything to kind of get that, make sure that license would cover that so that we could do Karam Caravan, for instance. But with the sanctions removal of that, all went away. What will really make a big effect on the sanctions is opening up. Right now, there's still no operational banking system in Syria. Everything is cash-based, which is really, really hard to operate as an organization and as people functioning. So that's really halting people actually going back and doing investments and doing, there's lots of promises of these large scale investments with the government from foreign countries, but until the sanctions actually really get removed and the banking system gets restored, it'll be very hard to do these kinds of large scale projects.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk and for the work that you're doing. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about sort of the curriculum of like these, like the classes in the caravans. It seems like there's a lot of emphasis on like design thinking, like VRs, like computers, like incredibly important. I guess I'm a history student, so I guess I was wondering if like there's any emphasis on like reading and writing and like I guess more like liberal arts education. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The design thinking program is very much, you know, technology and innovation and design thinking based. But you're absolutely right, and this is why we bring people like Wendy to Karam House to try to instill the right writing and storytelling. I mean, they do a lot of they have to actually learn how to write about their project verbally and orally and in a presentation. So there is some of this. But we always definitely struggled in bringing in, and there's a lot of arts and creativity and like murals and visual arts are definitely have a place, but definitely I think we could do a lot more in terms of history, and these kinds of the humanities would need to have more. It does focus more on these skills that help you to be able to work after, and even like the soft skills of collaboration and work and presentation and all of these different things. But yes, definitely there is a gap there, which I hope that we could do. Like cultural heritage for us is really important, and I'm hoping that the curriculum can develop as we coming into working in Syria, especially because we're working now in a school setting versus Karam House in Turkey was always an after school and weekend program because the kids all went to Turkish schools full time.
Hi, my name is Rawia. Nice to meet you. I was wondering, you mentioned that Karam was an idea born at your kitchen table in like 2007. Is that correct?
Yes.
I was wondering how you were initially able to scale up Karam from just an idea and put it into concrete action and really just enact it.
Yeah, I mean, we did it really step by step. It was not easy, and I didn't really think that it was going to be what I do full time. It started, you know, really small. Everybody was a volunteer board member for many years. And I think the thing that made Karam actually become a real, you know, full-fledged organization, when we started working in 2011, even though our first employee didn't come until 2015. So there was a lot of years of just, you know, grinding at this thing. But what I think happened when 2011, the revolution began in March, and people started calling me from, you know, mostly here in Chicago, a lot of the Syrian-Americans all wanting to help because the crisis had started and it was an extreme like urgency. And what I realized that later is everybody wanted to donate, everybody wanted to do something because we were in this mode. But what we had done from 2007 to 2011 was build a lot of trust. Because people came to us knowing that, and we didn't even know we could do it because they were asking me to do things that I didn't know how to start a field hospital in the middle of Syria during the beginning of a war. But I realized later is that we had built that trust. So I think one of the most important things is if you have an idea and you build, like you have to have good people around you to start it, and you have to really be prepared to sacrifice the time to make it really good. And then you want, whenever people do actually contribute to your organization or your idea, you want to make sure you're building really strong relationships and trust with those people, because we have people with us now that have been with us for all of these years. And so I think it's in any idea or whatever you decide to do in life, those relationships matter a lot.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. I thought the focus, especially on the psychic reconstruction, was immensely interesting, especially for you as architect. And I'm wondering, about your vision also of the physical reconstruction. And when you look around and think, do you want things to look as they did before? Do you have a vision for what Aleppo looks like, especially the parts that were bombed? And just to say thank you again for a really fantastic discussion.
Thank you. This is a very hard question, and it's really an important one. Reconstruction is going to be something that we have to think about very carefully, especially in areas like Aleppo, where the actual old city was destroyed. And those were some of the slides that I was showing, that some of the stuff that happened. So Aleppo is also a very specific case because Aleppo fell to the regime in 2016. And so they actually had time under the regime to start doing some things, which thankfully wasn't a lot. But what they have done is atrocious, like rebuilding old sites in like brand new stone, like not even thinking about the historic sites and the historic nature of these. For instance, the minaret of the old mosque, even though this is not coming from like they didn't know or they didn't have enough resources, because the regime actually worked really hard in the 90s and the early 2000s with the Aga Khan Foundation and the Germans, the GIZ German group, and they did a lot of work on the rehabilitation of the old city of Aleppo that was actually coming through. Like, and I was part of this because I studied in Aleppo, so we were part of like the students that were building the survey maps and everything. So things were very detailed, but when they came to just rebuild something to say they're doing something, they did it in a way that is not without any consideration to the history of the site. But now also with the new government and with limited resources, there is a big fear that rebuilding historic sites is not going to come with the consideration that it needs, because we're talking about, millions and millions, hundreds of millions that would be needed and a lot of time. So I am worried about the historic sites. In terms of the areas that are not historic, also you're worried because there's a lot of people coming in and we want to build like the tall buildings and make this into Dubai, or like making it look like there's a lot of this talk that makes architects and people that are very much committed to holding on to Syria's architectural nature and in a big way. But we'll see what actually happens. We're going to see something very different. And even in the schools, and even talking about like rebuilding a school, we're now in emergency mode. Karam and everybody else, we're going in and just doing the basics to get kids back, like to be more comfortable in their classrooms. But I also have a problem with why we shouldn't be rebuilding a school exactly the same, because we're also spending so much money and effort to kind of get it back to what it was maybe 3 decades ago. And so how do we actually rebuild a place, but also bring it forward into something that actually is accommodating towards the year that we're living in. So it's a very hard question to do. One thing that we are working on is actually, this is a pilot program. It hasn't even started yet, but we're working on a project with an organization called Turquoise Mountain, which works on cultural heritage projects. And we gave ourselves a challenge of building a new school desk, because this for me is something like a pet peeve of Syria needs millions of school desks, but everybody's rebuilding the exact same desks that you saw, this bench that you usually cram like 3 or 4 kids on. And it doesn't make sense that we're rebuilding these desks. So we want to test this in one specific thing in like the ocean of needs in Syria. Can we actually rethink and redesign a new school desk? And so Karam is going to be taking on the part of taking it to Karam House and having the kids do the design studios. And then we want to do local fabrication. We're hoping we're going to be able to have 1 classroom of these new desks, which the project hasn't started yet, by September. So we can report back to see if we can actually do this. But there is like that idea of how to we have the opportunity, you're building a new country. You have the opportunity to rethink everything, not just in architecture. This is also what politically people are talking about. How do you rewrite a constitution? How do we create a sense of democracy? How do we do all of these things when you actually have a new beginning? And there's a lot of turmoil and discussions, and not everybody's on the same page, but it's an exciting moment.
Hi, thank you so much. This was incredible. I was wondering, how are the kids feeling about moving back to Syria, and a sense of excitement, urgency, agency maybe because they want to be part of this change? But also, is there like therapy resources, or is there psychological support for them to find themselves not feeling like a tourist in their home, as you said?
So that's a really, really important question. And it's a very hard one because when we were seeing the families that were returning, the family that we visited in their home in Idlib, it was very hard because the mom came back. She wants to be in her own town. They have property. They could live in a better life than they were living in Turkey. And then you see the kids, and two of them or three of them were teenagers, and they were living in Istanbul. Like we're talking a cosmopolitan city and then coming back to this tiny town in Idlib. And you could just see it in their eyes that why am I even here? And that's really, really hard. Even the little kids were running around saying like, I'm from Turkey, I'm not from here. So return is also, especially for young people, it is another displacement. We in the families that have returned, we've been doing check-ins with them. And so the first month check-in in general across the board, there were a lot of people, even the adults were saying we came back, but we're not even comfortable with our own family members. Like we don't know why we came here. And then the month after, it's a little bit like, okay, we're finding our footing again. It's going to take a long time. Especially for the teenagers and the young kids, and they're the ones that are learning Arabic again. But also for the mental health support, it's a dire need really for everybody in Syria, and the resources are very, very limited. And we even had that problem with the refugee crisis. A lot of people talk about mental health, and especially for displaced communities, but what's actually created and delivered and at scale is not that, it's not that good. Like there's a lot of efforts, but it's very hard to get the support that people need.
Thank you so much for your talk first. And my name is Zain, and I have a question, which is from your personal opinion, do you think that it's fair in the first place to send this teenager that first lived a better life when it comes to, infrastructure and life quality, and just take them back to Syria, where it's like half of Syria is on the ground. There's no infrastructure, there's no quality education, there's nothing there. Do you think it's fair in the first place?
Well, it's for a lot of kids, yeah, it's that this move is not fair. The families that we're supporting are people that want to move back. And so we're trying to give them the financial means, but obviously no refugee family. And this is a big issue. We're going to see this issue with the European countries that want refugees to return. We might see it even in this country. And others that have taken refugees to return. And so forcing people to go back when they've already established themselves in different countries is not okay. And so it should be voluntary return. But what you're going to find is a lot of times the parents are living under extreme need. What we're seeing in Turkey is like they want to leave because the landlords are literally evicting them and having that. And so they're moving along with their kids. So what needs to happen is a lot of care for all of the students that are returning to try to help them establish themselves and assimilate in the new country. The problem is that resources are very little for even the people that are there. When we did the survey of return, if people wanted to return or not, we did it across 2,000 people, including our scholars. So a lot of the university students or the people that graduated from university with Karam scholarships would say, we want to go back to Syria later, but we can't go now. We want to can you help us go to Germany? So like people are still even looking like, how do we leave Turkey to like a better situation that they know that they can make a living. So we're very realistic in terms of like scholars or university students returning would be very limited. But no, it's not fair at all for people to be forced to return. Oh, there's a question here too.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the talk. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the bit that you talked about the sort of living together in a pluralistic Syria. I mean, obviously you've had a massive change in who has control, and obviously Syria is a diverse country with lots of ongoing challenges. how is that factored in both to the educational piece and to the mindsets of the people that you've been supporting?
So these are very hard questions. This is why Northwestern is a good university, I guess. I mean, that is really hard, really hard. Syria is going through a lot, and we saw this in the first year of liberation. We saw that there were, areas of conflict happening in multiple locations on the coast in the south, and then just even last month in Aleppo with the SDF and the Kurdish community. And there's going to be a lot that happens of figuring this out. What I hear from Syrians who are in my orbit of everybody wants to live together. Everybody wants to create this sense of, living together as one country. People very much are against division. I think the government has taken action to be better at this, but it's going to be a long road because you have, like I said before, 14 years of conflict and 54 years before that of dictatorship that really, really created its power based on separating people, not just in terms of, sects and religion and, people's identities, but also across the economic classes of Syria. So and it's very, very complex, but I think the more that we can actually create this, like for me, this is not part of Karam's work, but transitional justice and accountability are the things that are going to be really important for Syria's future. Like, how do we actually create this sense of justice? And in that, the government, I think, is being slow and also making some mistakes. And that makes the Syrian people very upset about, who gets to come to the country, who gets to come back, and who's part of the rebuilding, and how can we find justice for all of the people that have lost their homes, lost their family members, lost people in displacement, and that's a really big question. I don't know how to answer that, but maybe Wendy, you have. I'm sure you have answers.
Questions. Yeah, questions. It's a process, a long one.
Hi, my name is Misha. I'm quite optimistic on Syria's future, but I was just wondering if you think sort of like you sort of been over the biggest hill already, because even though Assad's gone and everything's sort of more free and there's some feeling of liberation, there's still different groups, different cultural groups. The Russians still have a base in like Latakia. And the government itself, do you think the government's going to sort of hold to what they've like put out, and that they're going to have elections within 5 years, and sort of having worked with the government, do you think the government's sort of moving down the right trajectory now? Or?
I mean, I really hope so. But President Sharat has a lot of popularity right now. So I would not be surprised if he was elected to be president. I don't know what would happen from here to 4 or 5 years. But if you have elections in Syria today, he would for sure win because he's very, very popular. I think, I'm Syrian-American. I'm very much American at heart. I was born in America and I lived in Syria and came back. And so I don't know. We're a political scientist here, but I think that it might be naive, but I think that we will have this George Washington moment for Syria. That's very, very important. And it's actually very important because right now we don't have any real democracy across the entire region. And so the idea of creating a sense of free elections and democracy in Syria, it is a very big uphill battle because everything around us will say you don't need to have that because we've been around and you have monarchies, you have dictators, you have quasi-democracies, but not really, and you don't have this real sense. So I think actually the most important thing will be, when will we have a leader who leads and then steps down, because that will be a precedent for the entire region. And I can't tell you if this person will do that or not, but that's what you're going to need somebody to start, and we haven't seen that.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think it's not just the one leader, but visions of like Karam of building the 10,000 leaders, and not just a question of what the government will do, but what society will push the government to do. And that's why these sorts of bottom-up initiatives of building citizens and building strong people who can
Yeah.
provide for themselves and their families and have opinions and express them and take ownership of their country is so important. And our theme, you know, for Buffett this year is Brave New Futures. So what Karam is showing us how to bravely build these new futures from the bottom up.
And I can actually add to this is that I was able to meet the President Sharad, a few times last year. And one time when he came to Washington, D.C., they had a very small meeting with about 30 people who all lead different organizations in America, Syrians. And we all were able to talk to the president. And I asked him a question about how he envisions rebuilding the education system in Syria. And that's when he talked about really wanting to build an online system for the 2 million kids who don't have access, and really how do we, because I was asking him, how do we bring back the education system to be, you know, worthy of these kids in 2025? And when I talked about it, I talked about Karam, and I said, we're on a mission to build 10,000 leaders for the future. So he answered my whole question about the education. And at the end, he said, this 10,000, it really sounds like a lot. And that's the kind of the whole point of that, being able to, they don't all have to be president, of course, but to be able to build that society of people who can actually lead change.
Thank you for everything. My question is, you talked to Ahmed Shara, so what do you think? What's his opinion about women's rights, religion rights? Because we hear a lot of bad things. I'm from Syria, by the way. That's the reason I'm asking this question.
So I don't know how to answer this question. I mean, I don't know what his opinion is. We know what he says. And what he says is that there is women's rights and that they aren't going to, and I've seen when they've done things as a government or people that are maybe parts of the government that not necessarily coming from the president himself, they backtrack things. So for me, this is something we've never seen in Syria, that when they hear kind of the rumbling of people, they take a step back. I see that as very, very positive. We just saw, you know, with the clashes with the SDF, that are the Kurdish forces in Aleppo, we saw them clash with them, take them out of the city of Aleppo, get people out of their homes and get them back into their homes within a few days, which is a huge step forward. And at the same time, giving Kurdish people, Kurdish citizens, their rights, which were taken away from Kurdish people back even in the 60s. So giving people the rights to teach Kurdish language in their schools, being able to have the same identity card. I heard the President Sharat talk about women and women's rights. It's also a part of the society as well. So there's something here where, what do the Syrian people get up and demand for? And what does the government do? There is a give and take here. Because, for instance, when there were parliament elections in Syria that were a part of each different group of like different geographic spaces, and they had the elections, there was only 1 or 2 women that were elected. And this was nothing to do with the government. So he even came out and said he has the right to assign 30% of the parliament. And he said, now I'm going to have to put them all as women because you guys couldn't actually elect the women in your communities. And my wife is going to be very angry about that. But it's like, it's kind of like, there are fears from where the background is. You can't sugarcoat the background of who took over Syria and the background of HTS. But we also see that there's also movement towards trying to become something else. So if the people of Syria want to push for that thing, I think we can get it much closer. But also if we don't have that cooperation, we could go the other direction.
Okay, our last question.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about like challenges and lessons and problems and everything that, you know, how much time it's going to take. But I guess my final question is, what is your ideal vision, like maybe sentimental vision of what Syria should look like in a couple of years?
Another easy question. I mean, my ideal, it's very hard. I mean, I was in Syria in October when we did this really amazing event for Karam Caravan in the National Library of Syria, which used to be called the Assad Library. And I never imagined that we would have an event in central Damascus in this amazing modernist building that most Syrians wouldn't even enter because it was never really a public building. And now we were there, and I had a student-led panel, and it was like filled with a room of people of Damascus watching refugee kids talk about their experiences with a lot of confidence, and seeing how like our work really blossomed, and being able to showcase that in the middle of Damascus was something that I never even dreamed of. And not even from the war, even from when I was living in Syria, because you know, back when I was doing my thesis, it was all about how public space was never really public in Syria because there was never any freedom. So to what can I imagine Syria to be? Definitely we want a Syria for all Syrians. I want to see accountability and transitional justice, but I want to see a place where you can really live without fear and with your dignity, and people and Syrians realizing all of their dreams that they were denied for so many decades. I think we're much closer to than that when we ever were. Like before a year ago, I would say this would be an impossible thing for even my children to see. And so there's a lot that happened for Syria that has a lot of hope and for the future. I just hope that we'll be able to get to that next stage of seeing what the new Syria can be.
What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.